I'm George Cheedy. We're on location downtown at the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. This is the next Atlanta. Violent crime has increased across the country over the last year, in large cities and small towns. But few places have endured the rate of increase of Atlanta. For the first 6 months of 2021, the city of Atlanta has endured 70 homicides. We remain above pace for 2020, which was the deadliest year in more than a decade here. It hasn't gotten better yet. The reasons are many. We need to talk about it on the next Atlanta. I'm George Cheedy. We're at the Center for Civil and Human Rights. This is the next Atlanta. I'm with Vanessa Cox-Logan, who is a community advocate, and I'm deeply grateful to have her here.
Thank you.
Vanessa, your family has been a victim of violence, and I hesitate to ask, but can you tell us about it?
I just heard my sister talking. I just couldn't believe it, that my niece had been murdered. She had went to her girlfriend's house to help her move. She was accosted and she was murdered. She was shot 7 times in her back, and then they flipped her over and they shot her in her head.
I am so sorry. My heart is broken. Tell us how this has influenced the work that you're doing right now.
I have always worked in the community. I've worked in the mayor's office of community affairs and then in the House of Representatives. So I've always been in the community. I also did some work with Jose Williams. When Alicia died, it made it so much personal. What we in turn did, I belong to a group called United Youth Adult Conference. If you're familiar with Arthur Langford, who was the youngest Black city council person, under his guidance, his brother, Michael Langford, started a program called the Arthur Langford Teen Leadership Institute. What we have done is come together and put together a consortium of teenagers that will put together a list of best practices, if you will, that the city can kind of guide. And everybody is talking about what we should do, but because this is happening to the teens, we want them to tell us what to do. So with that, we also have a new program. It's called Project Kit. It's keeping in touch. We take digital devices and we download music apps. One of Alicia's pride and joy was her music. She was a budding music artist. We download the application. We get the children involved. We teach them the ins and outs of the music industry. We want to keep them busy and we want to keep them connected.
That actually goes to the big question, which is what we can do right now about violence in Atlanta.
I think we need to start with a holistic approach. We need to do wraparound services for the entire family. As early as infancy, good quality daycare programming that would then lead into great after-school programs so the parents can stay focused. From after-school programs for children who don't or can't work well in a traditional school setting, we need to go back to job corps, things that's centered around skill building. And then with the onset of COVID, we've been so displaced and so far removed. We need to learn how to socialize. We need some socialization programs to teach us how to get along and how to do some problem solving.
I've heard that from several different people, that we call it domestic violence increase, but really it's people who are just angry and can't figure out how to manage that except to an act of violence.
We definitely don't have enough problem solving skills. However, in our community and the Black community, I don't think that it's a phenomenon. I think this has always happened to us. And the only thing that's bringing light to it is social media, the fact that we cannot turn away from it now. So this is not something that's just started because COVID or because we don't have these problem solving skills. We've always dealt with these issues.
There's a housing component to all of this that I don't think people really get. The people are insecure because of the pandemic. I think that affected things.
Oh, definitely with gentrification, with all of the restructuring in public housing, with all of the stringent demands, people just can't keep up. There's financially, there's not enough resources to put things and programs in place for people to stay gainfully employed. Even if they got the job, would they know how to do it? And even if they got the money, would they know how to spend it correctly?
So I didn't mean to gloss over the work that you're doing. Can you tell me more about the advocacy that you're engaged in?
The second night after Alicia was murdered, we set up a system, a buddy system with the Muslim community, other city council people. We had Byron Amos, who is running for a political position. We had a number of people to come out and do a vigil every night. And we literally walked the streets of that neighborhood and basically talked to the community and asked them, what do you want to see? And from gathering all of that information and spending time in the community, these programs came about. The basic needs are just not being met. So it steered me to say, what's next? So this happened, well, what is the next thing?
I'm going to ask a kind of a hard question. Should we have hope right now?
We always have hope. If we don't have hope, we don't have anything else. That is the only thing that keeps me going, is hope.
Vanessa, I am deeply grateful for your time here. You've been excellent, and I am again heartbroken for your loss, but I'm glad that you've been able to work toward a better community for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm George Cheedy. We're at the Center for Civil and Human Rights. This is The Next Atlanta. And I'm with Jim Durrett, who's the president and CEO of the Buckhead Coalition. Jim, I'm so happy that you are here.
It's my pleasure to be with you.
So let's start with this. The Buckhead Coalition it's about business, but it's also just about Buckhead broadly. I'm interested in both. Tell me how Buckhead views what's been happening in Atlanta with crime.
People in Buckhead are quite anxious about what we have been experiencing for over a year and a half, really. And I look back at the response to the George Floyd murder in Minneapolis, and then subsequent to that, Rayshard Brooks, and what happened in Buckhead when people were reacting to what had happened. And we've been on pins and needles ever since.
What do you think needs to happen? Like, what do you think needs to happen that isn't happening anyway?
I think that what we've been missing, quite frankly, is leadership that is present in the community and able to articulate that we understand there is a very big problem that we have to solve. I'm here with you, and we're going to work our tails off to solve it. That has been missing in large part, at least from the perception of those in Buckhead.
How do you communicate this problem to the community? And when I say that, I mean, statistically, you're safe. And not just Buckhead, in general. Like if you're not a gangbanger, frankly, you're not likely to be targeted as a victim. It's unlikely. But that doesn't necessarily go over well with people.
No, if you have been a victim of a crime or know somebody who has been a victim of a crime or are reading about somebody in your community that was a victim of a crime, you don't care what the statistics say, because we are in a period right now where we're experiencing something that we haven't experienced before. And it's not just crime. It's things that are happening in our daily lives that give us anxiety. I'm thinking about the water boys situation, where young people are aggressively out at intersections, and if you are not purchasing water from them, there's a very good chance that your vehicle is going to be attacked, and you are going to feel like we have lost control of things. The street racing that's been happening over the past year and a half, it makes you feel like we are out of control. So all of these things combined gives you an anxiety that you don't know if you're going to be able to get to a better place down the road because you're not seeing progress.
It's this perception, the perception of threat.
Well, it's not only perception, but I have actually met people and spoken with people who used to live in Buckhead and moved out of Buckhead, and they have shared their experiences with me. And it's a very real thing.
So I want to juxtapose this anxiety against this conversation that started about the separation of Buckhead from Atlanta. What's your view about all of this?
I understand why people have gotten to that point and are working so hard on achieving that. They're responding to the crime that they've been experiencing. They're responding to what they perceive as a lack of municipal services that they believe they have paid for, and they have, by paying very high taxes, and by an administration that doesn't seem to respond to their concerns. So they've thrown up their hands and said, well, let's take care of ourselves then. I believe that that is not the way to approach this problem or the best way to achieve a safer community. And we have an election coming up in November where we collectively have a really great opportunity to put in place leadership at City Hall, both in the mayor's office, but also City Council, to really begin to turn things around. I'm hoping that this has been a clarion call that we can't continue doing things the way that we've been doing it.
So I sort of touched on business. Like, there's a difference in the way a resident of Buckhead is going to react to this and a business owner. Like, can you talk to me about the difference there?
Well, business owners are concerned about two things principally. Number one, are my employees going to feel safe and going to be safe coming to work and leaving from work? And number two, what about our customers that come to meet with us? And if they're hearing things about crime in Atlanta, or in particular crime in Buckhead, is that going to put a strain on our relationship with our customers? So I get phone calls from people saying, assure me that this is going to end. Help me understand what is being done to respond to it, because my anxiety is getting to a point where I'm thinking about where I want my business to be. I'm hearing that every day.
Jim Durrett, Buckhead Coalition. You've been a glorious, glorious interview. I'm deeply grateful. I'm glad that you were here.
Thank you, George. Enjoyed it.
Hi, I'm George Chidi. This is The Next Atlanta, and I'm here with Chief Rodney Bryant of the Atlanta Police Department. I'm most pleased to be speaking with you.
Well, I'm glad to have you. I'm glad that you're taking this time to have a conversation with us as well.
So let's talk about what's happened with crime in the city of Atlanta. Crime has increased. It didn't come from nowhere. And I want you to explain start from the top. What has caused the increase in crime most? What factor?
It's difficult to point at one thing that we can say is the cause of what we're seeing around crime and the increases in crime. What we do know is that crime began to start spiking on us prior to protests last year. And so when you couple that with all the events of last year, you're going through a pandemic, you now have social unrest. That social unrest is targeted specifically at police officers, and the pains and aches of what officers went through, what the community was going through at that same time. It put us in a very unique space. And so as police officers were dealing with civil unrest and redirecting our tactics and our strategies to address civil unrest as opposed to regular crime fighting, the courts being shut down, some of the jails in our systems not being able to take people in the exact same way. All of that played into what we're finding as an increase in crime. To include, now you have schools are out, you have jobs that are closed, people are unemployed. So you have a plethora of things that are playing, many variables play into what we're seeing as a result of increase in crime. So now you're on the post side of the civil unrest, and now we're moving out of that space of a pandemic. But those things still exist, and you still see it didn't take a day to get into it. It would take way more time to get out of this, and it takes so many resources to do it. There's no one thing. I mean, I think that if you're looking at one thing to address, we won't accomplish it. We will clearly have to look at this systematically and address it as such.
There was, I would call it a catastrophic break in the relationship between the police and the public when Richard Brooks was killed. I've seen some data that show that there was a big drop in 911 calls immediately after the Richard Brooks death. And I'm wondering, to what degree do you believe that this relationship can be repaired? What will it take for the public to start interacting in the same way as they were before with the police?
Well, I would say this. I think that when we say there's a catastrophic break between the community and the police, that may be
I think we're overstating that.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a bit overstatement because there's always been a component of the city of Atlanta that has been very supportive of the Atlanta Police Department. They know that one incident does not make our police department. Now, that's not to say by any means that we don't recognize that there are fractions in our community that we clearly have to work stronger and harder to repair. We are not blind to that fact at all. And we continue to go out here and do that every single day with every effort that we can with the men and women of the Atlanta Police Department.
Gotcha. So in parallel with this, I'm looking at a gang problem or like a nightlife, music industry, stuff around the restaurants and bars that were open that's starting to come up. How does the police address this? Like what's the plan there?
So we are targeting the nightlife in Atlanta. One of the things that makes Atlanta so beautiful and attractive is our nightlife. People come to be sociable in our city, but then that also brings bad elements. And what we have to do is to be able to aggressively make sure that the people that are participating in that nightlife are abiding by our laws accordingly. Additionally, we recognize that there are people that take advantage on both sides of that nightlife. So we have restaurants that operate as nightclubs, and that has been a problem in the city of Atlanta as well. And so we're putting a plan together to increase our response to inspect those locations so we can address that accordingly. And we believe that if we are able to minimize those activities, that will cut down on some of the nightlife that we're seeing that's not welcome in the city of Atlanta.
I got it. The youth crime has been popping up in the news a lot. This image of the two 15-year-old kids who shot a security guard at Lenox is viral and disturbing to a lot of people. And it makes people ask, what is the city doing? How do you approach youth crime, juvenile crime right now, in a way that can prevent that?
So you bring up a good point. Let's speak on that. Right now, the children that were involved in this incident, neither one lived inside the city of Atlanta. So what we want you to have a clear understanding is the problem is bigger than Atlanta. This is not an Atlanta alone issue. We can't solve our problems by operating in silos. We have to go beyond our jurisdictions and work collectively. Because what we do recognize is that when kids and children don't have resources available to them, they find them. And so what we have to make sure is that when our schools are fully operational, our parks and recreation, our at-promise centers, our YMCAs, when we have those level of resources available to our kids, then we have somewhere for them to go and to give them another way out. But when those entities doesn't exist, they find something to do. And that makes it harder on the police to be able to address.
do you have a concern about losing the social justice, criminal justice reform in the push to push the numbers down?
I think that we have to be careful in doing it. We have to really be talking to each other, doing criminal justice reform. Sometimes you can overdo or over reform, and it'll put us in a bad space. Look at what we saw in the 90s. The push against let's have a war on crime. What that did is we recognized that it caused more problems today than it did back then. And so we have to be able to be very cautious of how we're doing that we don't change our laws so much so that it disrupt our communities more so on the back end.
Chief Bryant, I am deeply grateful. This was exactly what we were looking for, and I'm very honored to have been able to speak with you.
I appreciate it.
I'm George Chidi. We're at the Center for Civil and Human Rights. This is The Next Atlanta. I'm with Dorothy Hurst. She's a board member of the Atlanta Citizen Review Board, and she's chairperson of the Neighborhood Planning Unit M's Public Safety Special Projects. And we're honored to have you. I'm deeply grateful. So you've been sitting on a task force, essentially, that the city's put together looking at ways to immediately reduce crime. That task force just released its results at the time of this airing. Tell us of what we should expect.
So from the standpoint of what we came away with, it was an important council. We met numerous times or several times, and we came away with 7 major points. Some of the points were things that we want to continue with, and then we came away with some strategies or new things that we want to start. And I want to start with the first piece. One of the major pieces is that we want to develop a mayor's office of violence reduction. In that office, we want to have enforcement and non-enforcement pieces.
Interesting.
So in that office, we want it to be very small and non-political.
Right.
Also in that office, they will look at some of the new pieces that we're bringing forward and also coordinate some of the initiatives that the mayor has already brought forward. So that was one of the big initiatives that we're looking at.
That's interesting. This idea of that there's a non-enforcement element to violence reduction is fascinating to me.
Yes, enforcement and non-enforcement.
So what does non-enforcement look like? Like in terms of not a cop?
Right. When you look at the enforcement piece of it, obviously we're talking about the police. So the APD piece will also be in there, but the non-enforcement pieces will be some of the other initiatives that we're looking at. The other piece that we looked at was looking at things like implementing public awareness. You know, when you look at public awareness, we're talking about creating a campaign around things like making people aware through social media, through traditional media, through many channels about some of the things that that's what's available, some of the resources that we will be bringing available to them. The problem today is that when we look at what's available, people don't know how to mediate or, deal with the things that come before them. So the first thing they reach at is a gun.
Yeah.
Or some other way to deal with violence. So we have some other strategies that we want to make sure that they are aware of, that we can bring to their communities. So the way to get that out is through a campaign to bring forth those things. Not only that, but also look at in those campaigns that we bring out, we want to talk about how to address and warn people that in that enforcement, that there's an enforcement piece and a non-enforcement piece.
I got
And
you.
we want to bring that awareness out to them.
There's something I wanted to ask you about before we go more deeply into that. You live downtown.
Right.
In fact, you are the soul of downtown as far as I'm concerned. Like, what have you been seeing over the course of the pandemic when we're talking about violent crime?
I live in Zone 5, and in Zone 5, homicides isn't our biggest impact. Even though we have homicides, our biggest impacts come from ag assaults, and our ag assaults are coming from the clubs. The highest rate of violence that we are, when we look at the numbers, 110% of the ag assaults are coming from our clubs. But they're not clubs, they're restaurants. Restaurants. So when you look at those kind of numbers, they're alarming.
Like the people who are going to late night restaurants and then getting into trouble when they're leaving.
When we look at that and we look at how we can resolve that, we're going to talk about how we can do that through nuisance properties.
So we're almost out of time, and I don't want to give short shrift to the other things that the task force has come up with.
APD has a repeat offenders unit, and what they're going to do is bring in, from their repeat offenders coordination unit, they're going to add DAs, sheriffs, the Georgia Department of County Supervision, pull everyone in so that when people come in that are repeat offenders, because right now in Fulton County, it's hard to get information on a repeat offender, that you're making sure that these cases are properly adjudicated.
Dorothy Hurst, the soul of downtown. I am super honored, and it's a privilege that you've been here with us today. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Crime had been falling steadily for years. The causes of the increase now are many. The pandemic revealed deep inequality, and some have been better able to bear the stresses than others. A gang war appears to be raging on the street and at the clubs, and the community still hasn't completely reckoned with the damage done in the Rayshard Brooks shooting and its aftermath. We've given you a lot to think about, some resources to use. I invite you to watch this episode again and each of the previous thought-provoking episodes of The Next Atlanta. Just log on to fox5atlanta.com, go to the shows section at the bottom of the page, and click on The Next Atlanta. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon for the next episode of The Next Atlanta.